first tonight, Australians have been donating tens of thousands of dollars to an aid organisation in Gaza that's been accused of funneling money to a hardline Islamic terror group. As Israel's war on Hamas enters its second month, the international community has been eager to send humanitarian funds into Gaza, with Australia alone sending around $25 million so far. The Israeli government has claimed that international aid in the past has been exploited and misused to support terror, and this includes financing Gaza's network of underground tunnels and weapons. Well, tonight, in an exclusive story, I can reveal that the charity founded by Australia Palestine Advocacy Network President Nasser Mashni is sending money to a Gaza-based health organisation that's accused of being affiliated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It's a terror group known as the PFLP. It's responsible for hijacking planes, for assassinations, suicide bombings. It's a designated terror organisation in the United States, the European Union and Canada, while Australia has the group on its consolidated list of organisations subject to financial sanctions. The PFLP celebrated the October 7 terror attack and said in a statement on their website that they'll join their brothers in this battle against Israel. Now, NGO Monitor says that the links between the PFLP and the aid organisation, the Union of Health Work Committees, are so extensive that any funding supporting the so-called aid organisation is in violation of international terror financing laws and incompatible with human rights principles. Nasser Mashni is a founding and current board member of the registered Australian charity Olive Kids, and it claims to support Palestinian children and orphans. It's a worthy cause. But one of the four partners it sends funds to is the Union of Health Work Committees, a non-governmental organisation that says it provides health services in Gaza with a focus on women and children. A quote from the Olive Kids website. They say Olive Kids collaborates with UHWC to facilitate annual Australian medical missions to operate at Al-Ada Hospital. But look at this. Two recent reports by NGO Monitor in January 2020 and then another one in February 2023 expose the ties between this aid organisation, UHWC, and the hardline Islamic terror group based in Gaza, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP. NGO Monitor has been set up to assess non-governmental organisations that claim to be helping human rights. The 2020 report that you can see on your screen, it states, and I quote, UHWC's terror affiliation is antithetical to human rights norms and principles. Due to its affiliation with the PFLP, the provision of funds to UHWC is in likely violation of international, EU and domestic terror financing and material support laws. It says in its report, the organisation is therefore an inappropriate partner for governments and individuals seeking to further human rights in the region. Now, Israel also declared the UHWC to be an illegal organisation in January 2020. It then raided its headquarters in March the following year, seizing files before arresting 7 employees and other affiliates by May. The investigation alleged that the charity was overcharging international donors for medical equipment and other projects, and instead was funneling the remaining money to the terror group PFLP. Washington Institute fellow Matthew Levitt, and he's also the director of its counter-terror and intelligence program, he wrote a report in 2021 that examined the evidence against NGOs like UHWC providing funding to the terror group PFLP. His report noted how the evidence pointed to money laundering schemes, to obfuscate their role as PFLP fronts. He wrote, "First, they forged documents and receipts to significantly inflate the costs of a project as presented to donors. The difference from these inflated invoices would go to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine." The NGOs also presented foreign donors forged invoices for purchases that were either never made at all or made for a fraction of the slated cost. In one example, the UHWC is alleged to have forged receipts for a project to supply medicines in East Jerusalem. They claimed it would cost 2.4 million shekels, and that's Israeli currency, but it was only actually costing 100,000 shekels. They say that the remaining funds were redirected to the terror group. Another alleged case, the aid organisation told donors that a project to vaccinate Palestinian children would cost around 245,000 euros. The actual cost was only 2,500 shekels, and most of the money was siphoned off for the PFLP. In his report, Levitt concludes that the NGOs, including the UHWC, clearly do engage in civil society work and have partnered with the UN and human rights organisations, but he also warns that at a minimum, government, civil society organisations and human rights groups need to address the evidence underlying the Israeli allegations to determine if the organisations with which they've been partnering to further human rights employ the same people who are criminally responsible for the PFLP terror attacks. Now let's have a look at those terror attacks. The PFLP is responsible for the 2014 massacre in a Jerusalem synagogue where 5 people were killed, including 3 American rabbis and a policeman. They were responsible for a 2015 attack on Israelis driving a car. There was an assassination plot against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a 2012 attack involving firing an anti-tank missile explosive device. Then there was a spate of suicide bombings from 2002 to 2004. You probably remember them. They killed many Israeli civilians. Also, the assassinations of the former Israeli Minister for Tourism, Rahavam Zivi, and the Israeli head of security, Meir Lichtenberg, in 2001. There's dozens more. Its first major attack that made global headlines was back in 1968 when it hijacked a commercial El Al flight and held hostages captive for 40 days. And just recently, in a statement on the day of the October 7 attacks, the PFLP's military wing said, and this is a statement from their own website, it's still up right now, "We stand with our brothers in the Qassam brigades and with all the resistance forces and join with them in this battle which history will record." Clearly celebrating the October 7 attacks, saying they were going to join in the battle. Now today, Sky News asked Nasser Mashni if he was aware of the connections between UHWC, which his charity, where he was a founding member, partners with, whether he was aware of the connections between UHWC and the PFLP, and how much money had been sent by the Australian charity Olive Kids to UHWC, and whether he was concerned that that money intended for innocent Palestinian children could instead be exploited and end up with a terror group. He didn't respond to our questions, but Olive Kids chairman Amin Abbas replied to say that Olive Kids was raising funds in Australia to support orphaned children in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. He said every cent raised in Australia goes directly to support these children in their health and education. He said that Olive Kids is registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. The charity operates, fundraisers and distributes its revenue in full compliance with all ACNC conduct standards and is financially audited annually, demonstrating transparency in both its fundraising and expenditure processes. So they didn't answer any of our questions. A week after the October 7 attacks, Nasser Mashni stood at a pro-Palestinian rally in Melbourne where he expressed his anger that the Prime Minister had condemned the slaughter and rape of Jews.
I've never felt so alone when our Prime Minister condemned Palestinian violence. From the river to the sea!
And there's Mashni repeating that chant that seems innocent but isn't, from the river to the sea, is taken to mean that there will be no more Israel. It's a slogan that specifically calls for the annihilation of the Jewish homeland and the Jewish people. It's far from peaceful. The Sydney Morning Herald today reports that Nasser Mashni had also advocated for the destruction of the Israeli state and claimed that the world's power structures all focus upon Zionism. Clearly an anti-Semitic comment. And this is the man who met with Foreign Minister Penny Wong just a few weeks ago. The Foreign Minister posted about the meeting on her Twitter account, thanking him for taking the time. Penny Wong wrote, "I shared my deepest condolences with Nasser Mashni. Following the devastating explosion at the Gaza City Hospital, we mourn the loss of every civilian life." Now, clearly, there needs to be more accountability for how funds that are being sent to Gaza that are intended to help innocent Palestinian children are actually being spent. Given the evidence is already in that there are strong ties between a so-called aid organisation like UHWC and a terror group responsible for multiple horrific attacks, Australian charities like Olive Kids need to make sure and need to assure the public that they'll stop sending money in that direction. They need a responsibility to make sure that Australians' hard-earned charity donations are not going to exploit terrorism that will cause more loss of life. Nasser Mashni's also a supporter of the Greens Party, by the way. And the Greens today held up printed signs in the Senate in yet another staged protest. They were saying ceasefire now, and they staged yet another walkout. Have a look.
We must join together with the community and declare ceasefire now. Ceasefire now.
All right, you know that's out of order.
Ceasefire now.
I'd call you to order. Put those props away.